was taken out to this site in the middle of the desert. I had no idea what awaited me. And then I saw them. And I just started crying.
These trackways in the Arabian desert are footprints in time. They were made 7 million years ago by prehistoric elephants. They take us back to a bygone world and its vanished creatures. How did elephants from so long ago give rise to the magnificent animals we know today? How did any of the animals in this African landscape become what they are? For generations, it was a mystery. Now scientists are revealing the answers, piecing together an epic story. This film unlocks the evolution of 4 of the world's most spectacular creatures: crocodiles, birds, whales, and elephants. Like every animal alive today, they have a deep time history, a lineage full of twists and turns, shaped by strange ancestors from long ago. Bizarre ancient crocs,
This thing was built like a greyhound.
feathered dinosaurs,
Dinosaurs never went extinct. In fact, birds are dinosaurs.
a whale ancestor that lived on land.
It more looks like a dog with a long snout.
It's a story millions of years in the making, of lost creatures rediscovered, and the surprising lessons of deep time. Madagascar. 250 miles off the coast of Africa. This island is a perfect laboratory for the study of evolutionary change. Isolated here for millions of years, species have transformed in unique ways. Scientists have long studied the evolution of the island's chameleons, bats, and lemurs. Now, the search is on for the ancient history of one of Earth's strangest animals, the crocodile. In flooded underground caves, researchers are looking for the remains of an extinct croc species. It may have disappeared just 2,000 years ago, a recent twist in the story of crocs.
Some people see crocodiles as this animal that's unchanging through time, and actually we know now that that's not true, but they look like it.
Cold-blooded, ferocious, but strangely beautiful. The 14 living crocodile species are all very similar.
Most of the living species of crocodile are really, really hard to tell apart unless you're somebody who spends all your time thinking about crocodiles, like me.
They all have the same reptilian body plan. Low to the ground and armored from head to toe in thick scales. They seem like living fossils, some hangover from the age of dinosaurs. But are they? Is this really an animal frozen in time? Perhaps the mysterious species in the cave will provide some answers about recent crocodile evolution.
So there's this crocodile that existed on the island of Madagascar until relatively recently, and it disappears about the same time that humans got here. And that crocodile was called the horned crocodile of Madagascar. And so one of the big questions is, what was that crocodile? Who were its relatives? And what happened to it? It's one of the biggest mysteries.
Today, there is only one species on Madagascar, the famous Nile crocodile, one of the fiercest of Africa's predators. Scientists think it squeezed out the smaller horned croc. But there's a lot they don't know. There may be answers in the flooded caves.
I knew from speaking with some other people that there were supposedly crocodile skulls in this cave of this species that no one has seen for at least 200 years, but more likely 1,000 years.
A half hour in, they see it. A skull.
So excited.
A skull?
Yeah.
Look at that. It looks
Beautiful.
This is a skull of the extinct horned crocodile of Madagascar. And when researchers first started coming to Madagascar from Europe, they saw these crocodile skulls and they weren't sure exactly what they were. They didn't look exactly like Nile crocodiles. They realized it was a separate species.
If Yvonne's lucky, she'll be able to extract its DNA and learn where the horned croc fits into the story of crocodile evolution. To meet the very first crocs, we must trace one branch of the vast tree of life far back in deep time, 230 million years, into the geologic period called the Triassic. It's hard to imagine such a vast expanse of time.
If you look, for instance, at your historical time, you can think back to your grandparents and that time frame that people are still comfortable with. But you go further back, go say back thousands of years when much of North America was covered by ice. A very different world. But go further back yet, go back to 100 million years, and this world would have been entirely unrecognizable. It would have been like going to another planet and seeing life forms that were, for the most part, utterly alien to our experience. And this is really difficult to grasp.
There is little about the planet of the Triassic we would recognize. The continents we know today had not yet formed. They were all contained in one huge landmass surrounded by water, Pangaea. It was here, along with the dinosaurs, that the first crocs evolved. In the beginning, they were even more successful than the dinosaurs, and to our eyes, they look totally bizarre.
Well, the Triassic was in many ways actually the age of crocodiles. And in any Triassic landscape, you would have seen this vast diversity of crocodile relatives with many body forms.
Ungen Buhler has been unearthing the bones of the very first crocodile relatives. Two of them were found together near some sandstone cliffs in southern Utah.
Well, these are two of the most extraordinary skeletons from the crocodile line that have ever been found. This large animal here is something called a poposaur. And it's the only complete skeleton of one of these animals that's ever been found. All of the subtle features on it, I mean, it's the find of a lifetime. These animals show us what crocodiles were like at the beginning of their evolution. And they're very, very different. The extraordinary thing about this animal is that it was really trying to be a dinosaur before dinosaurs were dominant, in that it was actually walking around on 2 legs. You see how large and how heavily built the legs of this animal are compared to these tiny little arms. And so this animal couldn't rest any of its weight on its arms.
Poposaurus was a fierce, fast-moving land predator, acting for all the world like a dinosaur. And it wasn't the only strange Triassic croc to be found in Utah.
In fact, the poposaur, this large skeleton, was the first thing we found, and we dug out this big skeleton. Then right underneath it was a tiny foot. And underneath that foot was this animal here, which is the only complete specimen of what we call a Sphenosuchian grade stem crocodile that's ever been found.
They called the Sphenosuchian Littlefoot. It was even stranger than Poposaurus.
And so the poposaur is something like a mountain lion, whereas the Sphenosuchian, you look at this animal and it's got a slender little body, it's got extraordinarily long legs, extraordinarily long arms, and these arms were taking its weight, unlike those of the poposaur. And so this thing was built almost like a greyhound with a heavy head and a long tail. It was an animal that was utterly built for speed.
The strange creatures of the Triassic were part of the first great flowering of the crocodile family tree. But 200 million years ago, much of that tree was cut back, when a mass extinction wiped out the vast majority of the animals of land and sea. As the supercontinent Pangaea began to break up, volcanoes pumped vast amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, acidifying the oceans. The planet warmed, and habitats were transformed. Most of the Triassic crocodile relatives, including Poposaurus and Littlefoot, died out.
Extinctions are of great interest to evolutionary biologists because they basically reset the evolutionary game. Every once in a while during the history of life, there have been catastrophic events of such magnitude that thousands or millions of species were wiped out in what basically in deep time is a single moment.
There have been 5 major extinctions in Earth's history. Through the lens of deep time, we can see they caused profound destruction and changed the history of life on Earth. The mass extinction that ended the Triassic period ushered in a new chapter in the story of crocs. In the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, crocs flourished again, but in new and even stranger ways. A record of those wondrous creatures is preserved in one of the most spectacular landscapes on Earth, Patagonia.
Many groups diversified in the Jurassic. Dinosaurs were certainly the most conspicuous because they were big, but other groups began to diversify in a very, very impressive way, and crocs were one of them.
For the duration of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, almost 150 million years, crocs vied with dinosaurs for dominance. They stopped being only the land animals they were in the Triassic and experimented with radically new ways of being.
you start seeing animals like Dacosaurus. It's a swimming marine croc that adapted their forelimbs into paddle-like flippers. And then you have freshwater gigantic crocs like Sarcosuchus that's about 12 meters long. It was eating dinosaurs. And then you have herbivorous crocs like Notosuchians. Look at this animal. It really looks nothing like a croc. It has a short snout, very high, the eye sockets are pointing to the sides, and the crazy thing is that it moved the lower jaw back and forth. And this was a way of the upper teeth and the lower teeth to slide against each other, and in that way this animal was processing the plant matter.
So here was an ancient croc that chewed like a goat. Diego has spent much of the last 20 years excavating ancient crocs from the barren outcrops of Patagonia. But back when those creatures lived, the world was a very different place.
It was a much warmer planet. There were no ice caps on the poles.
In the warming greenhouse world of the Jurassic and Cretaceous, crocs prospered. This was their golden age.
They became so diverse that in some places you go and you basically only find crocs. So we can see a really crazy diversity in the Cretaceous. And then, about 66 million years ago, it all went away.
What happened to the many Cretaceous crocs? It seems most of them perished the same way as the dinosaurs.
It was long realized that around 66 million years ago, there was a major extinction of animals and plants on land and in the oceans. On land, the most famous casualty were the dinosaurs.
Scientists agree that an asteroid strike brought on the global devastation, but many now argue it was not the only cause of the mass extinction. From the fossil record, they can see that climate changes were already pushing many species to extinction before the asteroid impact.
So basically, this impact is sort of thought, if not the sole cause of the extinction, certainly the coup de grace for a great many lineages.
Ancient crocs were reduced to a fraction of what they once had been.
So, out of this wonderful diversity, only few species made it through. And the ones that actually made it through were very particular in many ways. They were certainly adapted to living in the freshwater environment. They were adapted to feeding in water. They were predators. They were not herbivores. They were not land crocodiles. They were not marine crocodiles. So only a tiny fraction of that diversity made it through.
The crocodiles that made it through were the shoreline predators that lived half in water and half on land. Their low, tank-like body plan may have been one secret of their survival. It allows them to lie semi-submerged in the shallows and ambush their prey with ferocious speed. The success of that lethal design is why crocodiles today all seem so similar.
Crocodiles have this form that's very successful. They have sort of an armored body plan that allows them to be a successful predator in aquatic environments. Aquatic environments can be more stable than other kinds of environments, like terrestrial environments. And so it makes sense that they've retained this body plan from deep time, from the ancestral crocodilians that were around the globe millions of years ago. It works really well. Why change it?
Of course, that classic body plan is no guarantee of survival. The horned croc of Madagascar died out just centuries ago, likely pushed out by the giant Nile croc. Results from Yvonne's work suggest the species are more closely related than anybody realized. It's a great example of how DNA analysis has become a vital tool for paleontologists.
One of the exciting things about the new toolkit we have today, the ability to use DNA to look at evolutionary history, is we can use it as sort of a metric for change over time and lineages. So with living species, we can take their DNA and we can calculate back how long it takes to accumulate the number of changes we see in the genome. And we can say, this corresponds to a split 3 million years ago, or 6 million years ago, or 20 million years ago.
DNA has shown that both crocodiles and alligators are descended from a common ancestor that lived 80 million years ago.
And then even more recently, this thing that we've always thought is the sort of primordial crocodile, the Nile crocodile, we recently have found using molecular clock dating that the Nile crocodile is just a baby. It just arose probably within the last 4 to 6 million years. It's a young'un on the landscape of crocodilians in the modern world.
So despite their prehistoric appearance, it turns out that over their 230 million year history, crocodiles have been in constant evolution. They have proved themselves to be one of the most resilient lineages on the face of the planet.
For me, these crocodiles sort of represent an organism that, through the history of life on Earth, it's found a way to persist.
The story of the crocodile lineage is of deep time transformations that produced a wild diversity of croc species, followed by a steep decline. Today, there are just a handful of crocs, and the strange animals that gave rise to them are all gone. The surviving crocs are all very similar, all shoreline predators of the tropics. But while the crocodile lineage has bottlenecked, another lineage is experiencing a wild explosion of diversity. Birds have colonized every environment on Earth, and they come in an astonishing variety of shapes, colors, and sizes.
There are more species of birds than any other group of vertebrates that lives on land. They can cross the Himalayas on wing. They can dive into a part of the ocean where sunlight does not reach. They can migrate between continents. So they are truly remarkable.
Birds have colonized not only the natural environments of the planet, but also the urban spaces created by humans.
There are more than 10,000 species of birds, but even more striking than that, there are more than half that number is just within one lineage, songbirds. So that means that the birds that are in your backyard are part of what is truly an extraordinary evolution.
So what's the story behind the spread of birds across the planet? How did they come to be everywhere and so diverse?
Things that can seem so commonplace, crows or pigeons in a park, are the leavings of an amazing history that stretches back
hundreds of millions of years.
Our understanding of that evolutionary history began with one extraordinary fossil discovered in the 1860s in Germany, Archaeopteryx.
This fossil, to many people, might just look like roadkill or something that hit your window. But in fact, to me, these bones, they come to life. And the wings are moving, covered in feathers, but with mobile claws at their tips. Most striking is a long, bony tail with feathers.
150 million years old, Archaeopteryx was a bird. It had feathers and it could fly. But with its claws, tail, and toothed beak, there was something almost dinosaur-like about it. It led proponents of the new theory of evolution to make a sensational claim. Birds must have evolved from dinosaurs.
When I look at this, I see an icon of evolution. It was one of the first key and totally unavoidable pieces of evidence consistent with evolution.
But the theory that birds evolved from dinosaurs met intense opposition. How could something so huge and heavy evolve into something so small and light? One of the biggest objections was that no dinosaur had ever been found with a wishbone. In birds, the crucial brace for the chest that makes flight possible. The search was on. If scientists could find a dinosaur with a wishbone, they would clinch the case. But for a century, they failed. Then, in the 1960s, paleontologist John Ostrom hit pay dirt. A dinosaur fossil with a wishbone. He called it Deinonychus, terrible claw.
Here we have Deinonychus anterophus, the fossil that changed everything that we know about the origin of birds and fundamentally altered our understanding of how flight evolved.
Deinonychus was a ferocious predator with wing-like arms and all the bones and muscles necessary for flight, but it couldn't fly.
Here's an animal with four limbs, much too short and much too heavy in the body to be able to fly, yet it has all the bells and whistles that we associate with the flight stroke.
Not only that, it had feathers too. But all this had nothing to do with flight. Its feathers were for warmth, and its clawed wings were for killing.
The arms up against the body, and you shoot it down and forward, grab your prey, drag it up and back, down and forward, up and back, down and forward, up and back. That's the flight stroke. So all the details, the basic architecture at least, of the flight stroke is evolved in an animal that is not using it to fly.
Amazingly, these tools built for killing would eventually power flight.
So you have feathers, and you have the flight stroke colliding in one animal, so the skies were no longer a barrier to the evolution of dinosaurs. And that's why we think that birds are living dinosaurs.
Deinonychus was powerful evidence that dinosaurs gave rise to birds. But the many stages of that evolution were still unknown. To complete the story, scientists needed more fossils. Another long wait began. Then, in the 1990s, farmers in a remote province of northeastern China blew the story of bird evolution wide open. They had been turning up rocks with the outlines of birds in them for as long as they could remember. They had no idea these were the bird dinosaur fossils scientists had been waiting for. By the late 1990s, fossil fever had broken out in Liaoning province.
At first, nobody knew how valuable they were. But then we found out. We all started to dig. I did too. I found something that looked like a bird. I didn't know what it was, but they said it was something called Confuciusornis.
A single fossil could bring a year's income. As farmers scoured the landscape, the fossils started to pour in. Hundreds of ancient birds from the time of the dinosaurs.
The fossils from western Liaoning started to show us the transitional forms. They showed us the earliest birds with beaks, the earliest birds with short tails like living birds.
Bird fossils are extremely rare because bird bones are so delicate. But here in northeastern China, 130 million years ago, a unique combination of circumstances created the perfect conditions for their preservation.
If you were able to come back here 131 to 120 million years ago and looked out, you would have seen lakes as far as the eye could see, with active volcanoes going off around them, and a forested environment growing by the shores of these lakes. And this forest would have been teeming with small feathered dinosaurs.
As those small feathered dinosaurs died and fell or were washed into lakes, they were quickly buried in layers of volcanic ash. The result? An extraordinary record of Cretaceous bird dinosaurs, perfectly preserved in stone.
The amazing thing about these fossils is the exceptional preservation of soft tissues, which reveal these extinct animals in a level of detail that we paleontologists never previously thought possible.
Fossilized along with the birds were plants and seeds, allowing scientists to reconstruct the forested environment of the time. Together, the wealth of Liaoning fossils reveal a world where creatures representing every stage of dinosaur to bird evolution lived side by side. They show how nature experimented with every aspect of what would finally make a bird. Beaks, wings, feathers, and flight. There was Caudipteryx, a small feathered dinosaur that had wings but couldn't fly. Living alongside it were creatures that flew but still had many dinosaur characteristics: teeth, long tails, and claws on their wings. And there were creatures like Confuciusornis, almost identical to modern birds. The feathered dinosaurs of Liaoning are a reminder that evolution does not move in a straight line.
There's a common perception that evolution proceeds in a very linear fashion. So you have a little dinosaur that somehow decides, quote unquote, to become a bird. But actually, the many bird features were gradually acquired. There were a lot of dead ends in this evolutionary process.
Just like Deinonychus, the Liaoning fossils show that wings and feathers evolved separately, and for reasons that have nothing to do with flight. It was only after millions of years that these things came together to make the creature we call a bird.
In fact, what we've learned from this huge diversity of fossils is that these features that we associate with modern birds actually evolved multiple times.
The Liaoning fossils opened a window on the profusion of feathered dinosaurs that populated the whole world many millions of years ago. What happened to them all? Most died out in the same extinction event that killed the big terrestrial dinosaurs and most crocs. But like the crocs, a few birds squeaked through. Those few survivors gave rise to all the birds on Earth today. But how did that amazing story of survival play out? Remarkably, scientists are solving that mystery not from bones, but from DNA.
So what happened is that this mass extinction occurs, maybe as a result of a big giant meteorite and climate change and so forth. A few groups of birds survive. Only 5% of the species survive.
Eric and his colleagues compared the genomes of different bird species to calculate their degrees of similarity. They could then figure out when they last shared common ancestors.
First thing we figured out is that those ones that survived with the deepest branches in the tree that we generated were the ones that were shorebirds, that can survive in water, that can survive in land, that can survive in different habitats.
Along with shorebirds like ducks and geese, the ancestors of ostriches and emus also survived.
Then those few 4 or 5 lineages that survived in a 15 million year window gave rise to every species that we are looking at now today.
Scientists are finally in a position to see the whole vast avian tree of life. Arising with the dinosaurs, the bird lineage experimented for millions of years with feathers, beaks, and wings. It barely survived a major extinction event before finally flowering in the 10,000 species alive today. But while the bird lineage exploded, and birds colonized every habitat on Earth, another lineage concentrated on colonizing just the seas. For as long as humans have known them, whales have inspired fear and wonder. How could these giants of the deep have grown so huge? How could air-breathing creatures like us have come to live in the depths of the ocean? What science now knows about these leviathans of the deep is amazing. Bowhead whales can live for up to 200 years, longer than any other mammal on Earth. Sperm whales can dive to depths of over 3,000 feet and stay underwater for an hour and a half without breathing. Blue whales are the biggest creatures to ever have lived on Earth, bigger than even the largest dinosaurs. Up to 100 feet long and 200 tons in weight, they have a heart the size of a small car. And these giants of the deep sing to each other, communicating over vast distances in a language of song that researchers still don't fully understand. How did these gargantuan animals and their remarkable behavior evolve? For so long, it was a mystery.
We've known that whales are mammals since the 18th and 19th centuries because they're warm-blooded and they suckle their young, but we didn't know where they came from. Darwin talked about the origin of whales in his classic book, The Origin of Species, where he said someone he knew had observed a bear swimming around, skimming insects off the surface of the water, and he suggested that perhaps something like a bear could have evolved into a whale, the kind of whale that filter feeds, by doing something similar and getting better and better at it over time. Now, Darwin was not correct about that, but at least he could conceptualize of a way that whales had evolved. But basically, we didn't know where whales came from until extremely recently.
The fascination with whale evolution began in the 19th century. Stories of sea monsters filled the popular imagination. When the first fossil whale was unearthed, its discoverers thought they'd found a gigantic sea serpent. It was called Basilosaurus.
It was discovered in North America along the Gulf Coast in the 1830s, and it was actually the first fossil whale ever to be scientifically named and studied. The gentleman who named it, a man named Harlan, had read about large sea serpents being discovered elsewhere in the world, and so he thought that this was something similar. And thus he named this animal Basilosaurus, which means king lizard.
Up to 50 feet long with ferocious teeth, Basilosaurus was a formidable marine predator. Finally, in 1841, it was identified as a whale and dated to about 35 million years ago. For almost a century after its discovery, Basilosaurus remained the oldest known whale. It was assumed to be the ancestor of all living whales.
So after the discovery of Basilosaurus, there were other whales found that were just a little bit earlier and more primitive, but not by very much, maybe 5 million years older than Basilosaurus. And it didn't push the origin back in time, and we really didn't discover a whole lot more about the origin of whales.
The deep origins of the whale lineage were a mystery until 1975, when a paleontologist went on a fossil hunting expedition to Pakistan. He wasn't looking for early whales at all.
I was interested in how archaic mammals changed into modern mammals. Things like the first horses, that's what I was interested in. I took several students with me and colleagues from Paris, and we looked first in Punjab province, then south in Sindh. We still hadn't found anything very interesting, and we went to the northwest frontier province, and there, high on a hill, we found a little jaw of a land mammal.
Later, they found a piece of skull, and its strange ear bones finally unlocked the secrets of early whale evolution.
This is what was left, the back of a skull, and if you look at the underside, it has the covering of the ear on the right side, and that covering is missing on the left side.
Those ear bones turned out to be the key. Philip thought he was looking at the skull of something like a primitive deer, but it unmistakably had the ear bones of a whale.
Whales have a special structure of the ear to be able to hear in water. It turns out that they effectively see in water by using sound, and so to do this, the ears have become modified.
The ear bones of whales are very dense, and that density helps them to hear sound in the water. Mammal ears originally evolved in terrestrial animals, and so their structure is optimal for hearing in air. And in water, sound behaves really differently. So For example, if you go into a pool or under a lake, you can hear sound, but it's a little muffled. But the one thing you can't do is you can't figure out where the sound is coming from around you. And that's because the way mammals do this is they use the difference in time between when a sound hits your right ear and your left ear to figure out what direction the sound is coming from. So if a sound is off to my right, it hits my right ear first, then my left ear, and so my brain says the sound is over to my right. But in water, the tissue of your face and skull is about the same density as water. So the sound, rather than going around my skull to my left ear, goes right through it. So it gets to my left ear at almost the same time as my right ear, and I can't tell where the sound is coming from. So the added density to whale ears is reestablishing their ability to hear directionally underwater.
Philip's fossil had that same distinctive ear, and it was 49 million years old. That could only mean one thing. Here at last was one of the very first whales. Philip named it Pakicetus.
Once we knew it was a whale, we knew it was the oldest whale anyone had ever found.
Pakicetus pushed the origins of whales back 15 million years, to the time when the Indian subcontinent was slowly crashing into Asia. Where Pakicetus was found was once an ocean shoreline. Its ears made it clear Pakicetus spent time underwater. But other fragments of skeleton also clearly showed it walked on 4 legs. How did this strange beast give rise to the giants we know today? Crocodiles and birds, whales and elephants are just 4 life forms among millions. The tree of life is vast, encompassing everything that has ever lived. What will its branches look like after the age of humans? The answer is up to us.